continue with letter 12, the supremacy of spiritual life. At this point, let us take account of or draw conclusions from all that has been said. You can see how many aspects, or better, how many degrees there are to our lives. There is the aspect or degree of the spiritual life. There is that of the spiritual intellectual. There is the exclusively intellectual. There is the intellectual physical. It seems that I have not described this properly. To this combination belongs observations with the imagination and memory, desires arising from physical needs, and sensations of bodily conditions and impressions. And there is the physical. There are 5 layers in all, but one person in man. And this one person lives first one life, then another, then a third life. Judging by this, a person receives a particular character according to the kind of life he lives. And this character is reflected in his views and attitudes, his habits and his feelings. That is, his life is either spiritual, with spiritual views, habits, and feelings, or it is intellectual, with intellectual concepts, habits, and feelings, or it is cardinal, with cardinal thoughts, deeds, and feelings. I am not taking into consideration the states in between, the intellectual spiritual, or the intellectual physical, because I do not want too many categories. This does not mean that when a man is spiritual, that the intellectual and physical have no place in him, but only that the spiritual predominates, subordinating to itself and penetrating the intellectual and the physical parts. Equally, it does not mean that when a man is intellectual, that his spiritual and physical parts no longer exist. Rather, when the intellectual predominates, it rules everything and gives its tone to everything and envelops the spiritual with the cover of intellect. Neither does it mean that when a man is cardinal, that his spiritual and intellectual parts no longer exist. Rather, that everything about him becomes cardinal. Both the spiritual and the intellectual parts become cardinal, subordinated to the flesh and trampled by it and held in its bondage. No matter which degree a person is at, other aspects of his life remain inherent within him. He is not so enslaved at any one degree that he could not be freed from its bondage, but always has the opportunity to change from one degree to another after he has weakened one aspect of his life and strengthened another. Thus, even a spiritual man may fall into intellectuality and carnality, and the carnal man may rise up to spirituality when the former becomes enamored of the intellectual and the carnal, and the latter of the spiritual life. Man is always free. Freedom is given to him along with consciousness of self, and together they constitute the essence of the spirit and the standard of humanity. Extinguish freedom and consciousness of self, and you extinguish the spirit, and man is no longer man. However, while I maintain that man has a freedom to move up or down along the degrees of his life, I do not at the same time maintain that it is possible to move with equal ease and comfort from going from top to bottom or from bottom to top, or that these movements may be carried out within a man as quickly as going from one room to another, as we do numerous times each day. I only want to say that man who is fully conscious of himself and who is free is the guilty party in his inner state. And if he has fallen into an appropriate state and remains in it, then he alone is guilty, and he is answerable to God and man for it. Each of the degrees or manifestations of our lives which has been shown is natural in us, and consequently cannot be disproved in and of itself. The condition that is unnatural and consequently is in and of itself opprobrious is that in which the thoughts stray, steam and seethe, and in which the desires are inconstant, being stirred by the passions. The passions are not natural to us, but alien, and the emotions of the heart are agitated and disturbed by reason of these very passions. I intentionally depicted these unnatural things within us while speaking of the mental life, in order to fix your attention on them. I intentionally mention this now also in order to force you to understand the matter a little better and to deal with it accordingly. The straying of thoughts, inconstancy of passionate desires, and uneasiness of the heart constantly disturb us, not allowing us to do a single thing as we should, and nearly always leading us astray. This illness, although it is universal and endemic, is not natural. Rather, it is contracted by us willfully. The enemy knows how much this aids him, and when attempting to entice someone, he first tries to push him into the whirlpool. That is, first he enters into the stream of thoughts. Beneath these thoughts, he kindles passionate desires, and with these he agitates the heart. A person in whom temptation has ripened is led to this point. If he does not come to his senses, he falls. After he has fallen, he is drawn into a whirlpool of turbulent motion of thoughts, desires, and emotions, sometimes for a short time, sometimes for a long time, and not infrequently forever. Such a life, a portion of which you remember you experienced, is passed entirely within this whirlpool, and, judging from the various groups, in some places it is more turbulent, in others a little quieter, and in some places more humble, in others in an upheaval in all its nakedness and shamefulness. Even aside from this, it is rare for a person to be free from all inner turbulence. Sooner or later he will break down. I do not know if anyone is free from this strain of thoughts and notions, but take note of this illness of ours. Actually, by complaining about the irrepressibility of the thoughts, you have already noted it in part. Once it has been noted, you get down to the labor of healing. Do not put entirely out of your mind the idea that within you there is always present something which is not good, which is always ready to divert you from the right way and to mislead you. As for the intellectual and physical parts, they are, as we have already noted, in and of themselves sinless and natural to us. But the man who has been shaped by the intellectual, or even worse, by the cardinal, is not sinless. He is guilty of granting supremacy within himself to something that was not meant for supremacy, and which is supposed to be in a subordinate position. It turns out that although the intellectual is natural, for man to be intellectual is unnatural. In the same way, carnality is natural, but for a man to be cardinal is unnatural. The error here is in the exclusive predominance of that which is supposed to be subordinate. When the spiritual reigns supreme in someone, then although this is his exclusive character and attitude, he does not err. This is because, in the first place, spirituality is the norm of human life, and so as a result, being spiritual, he is a real person, whereas the intellectual or carnal man is not a real person. Secondly, no matter how spiritual someone is, he cannot help but give the intellectual and cardinal their rightful place. He maintains just a little of them in subordination to the spirit. Let intellectuality be not too broad within him in scientific knowledges, arts, and other subjects, and let carnality be firmly restrained, then he is a real, whole person. But the man of intellect, the expert, the connoisseur, the shrewd man, and even more so the cardinal man, is not a real person, no matter how appealing he seems outwardly. He is foolish. Hence, the simple man who fears God is superior to the man who is diverse and elegant, but who does not have among his goals and yearnings the pleasing of God. You may judge in the same way about works of literature and art. Works in which everything is cardinal are completely bad. Those in which intellectuality is supreme also do not answer their purpose, although they are higher than the cardinal. This judgment concerns those works that have no spiritual elements, those that are directly hostile toward all that is spiritual, that is, toward God and all divine things, are direct suggestions of the enemy and should not be tolerated. From this you see that according to natural purpose, man must live in the Spirit, subordinate everything to the Spirit, be penetrated by the Spirit in all that is of the soul, and even more so in all that is physical, and beyond these in the outward things too, that is family and social life. This is the norm. I will not try to persuade you to live in the Spirit and subordinate everything to it, supposing that if you have already thoroughly examined everything that has been said, that the determination to live in this way already exists within you. You have already expressed the firm desire to stand on the level of human life as it is intended to be. You see now what it is intended to be, and of course, you wish it to be so. Yes, indeed, you have lived up to now in your family and circle of relatives in the manner depicted, that is, according to the Spirit. Although you have studied sciences, know how to run a household, and are a master of music and singing, you do not have to be concerned with establishing the spiritual within yourself, but rather with supporting and maintaining it, protecting yourself from the influence and attractions of the intellectual, carnal life, into whose whirlpool you began to fall. This is the very thing we have agreed to discuss. Of course, you are awaiting a solution as soon as possible to the question of how this life is to be. Well, that concludes letter 12. We'll see you on the next Orthodox Gardener.